Eli 5. Can someone explain the phrases I am become death? The grammar doesn't make any sense. Have always wondered about this. This is such an enormously famous quote, although the exact choice of words has always perplexed me. Initially figured it is an artifact of translation, but then, wouldn't you translate it into the new language in a way that is grammatical? Or maybe there is some intention behind this weird phrasing that is just lost on me? I'm not a linguist, so Eli 5. Also, it is a translation from the Sanskrit Bhagavad Gita, so there may be some translation issues. Also, in case of the now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds quote, death was personified into physical form by Vishnu in order to convince Arjuna to defend his people against friends turned enemies. Grammatically it is correct. 2 nights ago I watched a documentary on Ryuichi Sakamoto, and this phrase I am become death was featured in a live performance of one of his works. I literally had the same question, but kept it to myself. Thank you Op. I am become death, the destroyer of worlds is a quote from the Bhagavad Gita, which was not originally written in English, so the translation is a bit weird to us. The top answer is the right one, but I've always read it poetically. Like an ethereal force describing itself. It has become death, yet it was always meant to be death, and has been since its creation, and it always knew, but didn't know at all. It is in fact grammatically correct. Both have and be stress the state that you are in now, rather than the action. So I have arrived emphasizes that you are no here, rather than the act of arriving. The difference lies in the time. I have become death means that you are death and you became it some time ago. The becoming doesn't matter, it's just about the fact that you are death. I am become death means that you became death in the moment you said it. Like before, it stresses that you are death, not that you re-becoming. I read somewhere that time and death can be used as interchangeable words, and a closer translation is now I am become time, which isn't as badass, but it's more in line with what What's His Arms was trying to show the prince, that all things are that are going to happen will happen because God is all things and all things are in God, so kill your cousin Brolamau. The real problem with the quote is the translation as death. The true translation would be I am become time, the destroyer of worlds. I am become death was Oppenheimer's personal translation of the text. It may not have the same meaning as intended by its authors. I always wondered if Oppenheimer took inspiration from Christian's bad conjugation, for example, he is risen. So it's a quote from the ancient Sanskrit epic Ramayana, and I think that the translation into English is going to differ depending on which Asian version is used to render it. Not unlike a Bible, it has been transcribed into many different ways and reader interpretation is key. We know it as a phrase in the West after Oppenheimer quoted it on TV in an interview about the first atomic bomb test. His interpretation of the words spoken by Vishnu after taking his many-armed form I am become death, destroyer of worlds full quote depends on which version he read. That sentence is from the Bhagavad Gita. To understand it, you must understand the non-duality Advaita Vedanta context. The phrase I am refers to the sense that I am that exists in every sentient being, and it is being used as a noun here. That phrase is the same as the last part in Jesus' famous quote I am that I am. It's just a quote, and quotes don't have to make sense. In this case the phrase operates on the poetic level, which just means it doesn't have to follow all accepted grammar rules. Oppenheimer quoted it from Hindi scripture too, I believe, so it is also an pretty ancient quote that wasn't originally English. The reason they chose to translate it this way could have been to keep the same tone the original phrase had. I think the larger context is time. Since the phrase implies that the transition has already happened, is happening and will happen. After witnessing the first successful nuclear explosion at the Trinity test site in Los Alamos, New Mexico, which took place on 16 July, 1945, Oppenheimer remarked later that it brought to his mind words from the Bhagavad Gita Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds, chapter 11, verse 32. Not become dead, or just died. Have metaphysical state of death. Death, capital D death, existential ending. Since the question's already been answered, I just wanted to add on that this construction can be seen in modern German, where sein to be is used in some places where modern English uses to have, for example for changes of state or location. Thus, I have woken up. Ich bin aufgewacht instead of ich habe. I just explain as it's archaic English. Doesn't make sense now, but it did back in the day. Alongside the explanation of Old English, it also is a translated phrase out of Hindu myth, and for heavens know what reasons, it and Buddhist writings were often translated with a very stiff, literalist, esoteric tilt to them, so you have the scene of intimidating a prince into action by revealing great power. Use the phrase I am become death, destroyer of worlds, and then Oppenheimer quotes it in his own talk about the Manhattan Project, and the phrase effectively hits mainstream. Also, keep in mind that Oppenheimer was quoting a passage from the Bhagavad Gita, which is roughly 2,500 years old and was translated to older-style English from Sanskrit. The language is going to be a little archaic sounding.